Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we have one of America's premier chefs on board. Her name is Gabrielle Hamilton, and she has written a book with a challenging title, I would say, Blood, Bones, and Butter. It's not a mystery. It's rather a memoir, The Inadvertent Education of a Reluctant Chef. I take it that reluctant chef is you?
It's me. Good afternoon.
Nice that you came on board. Incidentally, we're published today by Random House. We need to say nice things like that about Random House. And you are, at the moment, the chef owner of Prune restaurant in New York's East Village. You got an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Michigan, and your writing has appeared in places like the New Yorker, the New York Times, GQ, Bon Appetit, and sports pages everywhere around the country.
I know a lot about horse racing.
Yes, there you go. And the interesting thing is one has to go to the back jacket to really understand what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with someone who's shaken up the big guys in the food and chefing business. One fairly big guy, Anthony Bourdain, says about this book and the author, magnificent. Simply the best memoir by a chef ever, period, in ital, ever. You have to do that, ever. Gabrielle Hamilton packs more heart, soul, and pure power into one beautifully crafted page than I've accomplished in my entire writing career. Blood, Bones, and Butter is the work of an uncompromising chef and a prodigiously talented writer. I am choked with envy. I just see him writing that, and then had a coughing fit, and no, seriously, that's really something else. And the reason he's choked with envy is that if we go right to an early page 20, something is going on there, and I need you to background it for me. It is from your familial home, or at your familial home, the annual lamb roast. Mm-hmm. It's on page 19.
Okay.
And what is the annual lamb roast?
It was this terrific party that my parents threw every year in our back meadow, and we probably...
And you were living in one of those towns on the border of Jersey and Pennsylvania?
That's right. It's right on the Delaware River, and the two states share a border so closely that you could walk back and forth between the two states 10 times a day. And
the property, does not have a backyard.
Right.
It has a meadow.
It was a silk mill, a 19th century silk mill, and it had crumbled and decayed, and my father bought it and built onto the outside 2 walls and left the remaining sort of skeleton and crumbling walls, and that's where we grew up. And the backyard was, in fact, a meandering meadow with a stream running through it, and there were weeping willow trees that lined the banks and wild geese. It was idyllic.
It's an idyllic setting. And then one of the things was just a summer fest, I guess. Wouldn't it be summer when this was done?
I think we probably did it in June, something like that. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure.
And then on page 19, right about here,
mm-hmm.
you talk about the lamb roasted so slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Would you read that to the end of that paragraph, please?
Of course, yeah. The lambs roasted so slowly and patiently that their blood dripped down into the coals with a hypnotic and rhythmic hiss, which sounded like the hot tip of a just blown-out match being dipped into a cup of water. My dad basted them by dipping a branch of wood about as thick and long as an axe handle, with a big swab of cheesecloth tied at its end, into a clean metal paint can filled with olive oil, crushed rosemary, and garlic, and big chunks of lemon. He then mopped the lambs slowly, gently, and thoroughly, back and forth with soft, careful strokes like you might paint your brand-new sailboat. Then the marinade, too, dripped down onto the coals, hissing and atomizing, its scent lifting up into the air. So all day long, as we did our chores, the smell of gamey lamb, applewood smoke, and rosemary garlic marinade commingled and became etched into our brains. I have clung to it for 30 years, that smell. I have a chronic summertime yearning to build large fires outdoors and slowly roast whole animals. I could sit fireside and baste until sundown.
Yes, yes, yes. And then on the next page, it concludes, slowly the meadow filled with people and fireflies and laughter, just as my father had imagined. The lambs on their spits were hoisted off the pit onto the shoulders of men like in a funeral procession, set down on the makeshift plywood on sawhorse tables to be carved. And then the sun started to set. We lit the paper bag luminaria, which burned soft, glowing amber, punctuating the meadow in the night, and the lamb was crisp-skinned and sticky from slow roasting. And this is my favorite phrase in the whole business. And the root beer was frigid, and it caught like an emotion in the back of my throat.
You're
now,
so
I'm
good
sorry
at
we
this.
can't serve that because we have more things to cover in Blood, Bones, and Butter. It's the story of how the reluctant chef became a restaurant owner. So stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Gabrielle Hamilton is on board today to talk about her book published by Random House, which is called Blood, Bones, and Butter. Still sounds like a murder mystery to me, you know? But it's not a murder mystery. The subtitle will tell you that it's the inadvertent education of a reluctant chef. And really big-time guys in the restaurant business are going gaga. Not Lady Gaga, just gaga over this book. One of them, Mario Batali. Batali. That's pretty good. I said Batali. Mario Batali. Gabrielle Hamilton has changed the potential and raised the bar for all books about eating and cooking. Her nearly rabid love for all real food experience. And that's something that you insist on throughout the book. Real food experience, not manufactured, not thrown together. I mean, your diatribe against catering is extensive and exquisite, although I worked in catering. Her nearly rabid love for all real food experience and her completely vulnerable, unprotected yet pure point of view unveils itself in both truth and inspiration. I will read this book to my children and then burn all the books I have written for pretending to be anything even close to this. After that, I will apply for the dishwasher job at Prune to learn from my new queen.
We're waiting for that to happen.
Yes. Is he there yet?
Batali,
Yeah, he
doing a
probably
dish
hasn't
shift.
washed the dish yet.
Oh, I'm sure
We
he's...
got this on the back jacket. You know, he's humble. He loves you. He's going to wash. He hasn't washed the dish yet, has
At
he?
Prune, I think he did bust some glasses the other night.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, he's on his way. You can let him near the sink after a while, and it'll be fine. So there's a part in the book where you decide, for no good reason, it seems to me, to go into the restaurant business. You write, I had no idea how to open a restaurant. I had that work ethic and that nearly strange mania for cleaning and organizing kitchens to forever recreate my own mother's. And I had just spent a few good long years understanding my relationship to kitchen work itself and could, with a certain calmness, claim to have put the question to bed. The greener pastures I had been straining my neck to gaze at all those years were not, predictably, as sweet and filled with clover as I had always imagined. And to open a restaurant with nothing more than an idea for a menu, a clean kitchen, and an apt name would have been certain failure. So let's start at the beginning. Why did you call it Prune?
That was my childhood nickname. My mother called me Prune, and I wanted to have a restaurant that had food from the time of my childhood, where the food I had grown up eating, or a way of eating and cooking that I knew from home. So I had spent a long time in catering, which is not the kind of food I grew up eating.
No, it's not.
Or cooking.
And, you know, one of the saddest things, I think, in the book is I don't know whether this is the right word. I was going to say estrangement from your mother, but I don't know if it's that you were estranged. You just kept yourself separate for so long. And if one reads the early part of the book and, you know, the life that she made for you or helped to make for you with your dad, it seems terrible to have separated like that. I mean, it's very sad to me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you did
this is
finally
supposed to be
get
a
up
funny
there.
book.
Yeah.
Not supposed to be, but
Well, that's in there, and it's very sad. It's very poignant, and I think there is a moment when you do make amends of sorts, and that's good.
well, she was a huge influence. So I'm very grateful for the time that we had, and that's what I mostly wanted to write about. I wrote about the people in this book, in as much as they pertain to food and cooking. So that was her appearance.
And she, I mean that whole home you lived in with that meadow and everything, and she was really the head of that, wasn't she?
She lived in our kitchen, and at that time, 30 years ago, it had a 2-bin stainless steel sink and a 6-burner Garland stove, and she definitely ruled the house with an oily wooden spoon in hand, for sure.
And here you're writing, I'm not even sure where this is. We would have brown butcher paper on the tables. Is that at home?
No, that's what I'm envisioning for the restaurant.
Ah, that's right. This is the vision. No tablecloths. That means he can't wash tablecloths. Just that.
Batali.
Yeah, Batali. We would have brown butcher paper on the tables, not tablecloths. When you finished your meal, the server would just pull the pen from behind her ear and scribble the bill on the brown paper. Now, that's a trick that you picked up where?
There was a restaurant, if you can even call it that, on an island in Greece, which I encountered during a kind of 2-year, nearly penniless vagabond time of my life. And she had the kind of place where she rode her donkey, her name was Margarita, up into the hillside and collected the wild greens, and her son went out in the fishing boat, and whatever he caught, that was for dinner, and she made her own wine. And you would go in her kitchen, she would lift the lids off the pots, and you point to what you want, and that's forever been my ideal of a restaurant. Very simple.
I love that. That's a wonderful concept. And in her restaurant, you know, if the son did very well with the fish catching,
you ate well, and if he only caught a few things, they ran out at 8 o'clock.
No more fish.
It ran out.
Oh, and one of the other rules, if you will, in your restaurant called Prune, in ecstatic farewell to my years of corporate catering, we would never serve anything but a martini in a martini glass, preferably with gin.
Well, that's one of the indignities of catering. You have to always come up with a new...
Yeah, the new way to dress the same...
trick, yeah.
Dress the same food. There's a very great Italian connection to your story, and we won't let you get away without having you talk about it.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast, and we're talking today with Gabrielle Hamilton about blood, bones, and butter, the inadvertent education of a reluctant chef. And one Mimi Sheraton, whom you all have heard of, says this in part: I have long considered Gabrielle Hamilton a writer in cook's clothing, and this deliciously complex and intriguing memoir proves the point. Her candor, courage, and craft make for a wonderful read, but even more for an appreciation of her talent and dedication, which have resulted from her often trying but inspiring experiences. Her writing is every bit as delectable and satisfying as her food. Now, on Sundays in your restaurant, it seems things are very satisfying because off-air you told me you serve how many, is it brunches? Do you call it brunches? Or?
We call it brunch on Saturday and Sunday. Yep,
okay.
We do brunch.
And
we can
on
do
a
a little
bright
over
Sunday
200.
morning in Manhattan, how many brunches in a 32-seat restaurant do you turn out?
We do a little over 200, if you can believe that, in 5 hours. And each of them perfect, I assure you.
Right. And bell goes at 9 o'clock?
No, we start at 10.
Oh, at 10.
At 10 o'clock, they line up a little bit before. There's usually a line down the block at 9:30, 9:45. And, right, it sort of feels like the bell on a boxing match. It's just,
bing, bing,
here we
bing,
go,
bing.
Bring it on.
And it's not true. It's not true that if you do not come up with what you want in 2 minutes, it's not true that it's the chef's choice. No, that's not.
We do try and guide you in your ordering.
Look at that. Italy. Italy is a part of your life. Italy is a part of your story, so well told in this book. And there is a number of places to start talking about you in Italy. But I'd like to start with Aldo. Aldo, who is the mother of your husband. And obviously, she's, born and raised, lived all her life in Italy. And the two of you do not speak the same language. And so you say, we just hug and cook a lot, which can seem at times like a greater intimacy than the one I have with her son, and a very compelling reason to stay married to him. She's an amazing woman.
She is magnificent. She's such a matriarch, and she's probably 86 now.
Yeah.
Still
going.
Mixing the dough,
Right.
making the pasta, regretting that they won't let her drive.
Well, in Italy, they won't let her drive. Oh, they let everybody drive in Italy.
She's got that much fire.
There's another point in the book where you talk about two women sitting at a table in their house dresses, the code of dress for Italian older women, and Manuela with her eyeglasses down to the end of her nose, a pile of grains in front of each of them, and quietly, speaking only occasionally, they sat there and separated the husks from the grain. I understood the task immediately. I'd done this in Turkey when I was politely disappearing, and so took my coffee and joined them. Quietly, I insinuated myself into their silent conversation around wheat. Now we all three were sharing the same experience.
I have to do that all the time when I'm there because I don't speak Italian very well. It's gotten appreciably better over the years, but most of my conversation, if you will, with my in-laws is through cooking. So we spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and Alda is always going to the market early in the morning and returning back to the house and tossing me something in a bag saying, come on, what are you going to do with this? And it could be puntarella, the Italian dandelion, or lumache, the snails, lampascione, these little bulbs that are pickled. She's always throwing me a little treat that I get to learn from, and we cook together.
And there's the sense of communicating while you're doing something with food. Has that come across to America ever, do you think?
That's funny. I think two people in a kitchen working together, that is a kind of conversation. If you see someone starting to husk the peas and then you arrive with a colander,
right.
You are talking.
One of the things that you did, and I found it strange, and I thought I was beginning to understand you.
Not so fast.
Was you went to the University of Michigan Graduate School for a master of an MFA degree, as they say, and there's one phrase that you use, frequently throughout that section, which cries to me, "I'm uncomfortable here," and that phrase. You kept referring to people sitting in leather chairs. as though that were, somehow sinful or something.
No, I think it just explains why I ended up back in the restaurant business after graduate school. I just found the life too idle and luxurious and not purposeful enough. So I really wanted to get back into that urgent, hot, completable task at the end of a day. So I liked that about cooking. It felt very practical.
I know the real reason. It's in the book. You never wanted to really find out what is the second-person static point of view.
That's true. I was baffled by some of the terms when I got to grad school. It was at first a pretty uphill climb for me. I'd like to think that I eventually figured it out.
You went back to food, and you went through that whole horrible catering experience, and now we can find you week in, week out, Sunday in and Sunday out at a wonderful restaurant called Prune.
Indeed.
When you go to New York, do it. Go to Prune. And before you go to New York, buy the book, Blood, Bones, and Butter, The Inadvertent Education of a Reluctant Chef by Gabrielle Hamilton. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.